Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see you here for the second panel of today. My name is Jelena Trkulja, and I would love to introduce to you our second panel and the panelists. It's called Rubaiya, Bukhara, and Jaou, New Platforms, New Possibilities. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Sheikha Alanood Thani, Gayane Umerova, and Lina Lazaar. And our moderator for today is Amir Berbić. Please help me welcome them to the panel.
Thank you, Dr. Jelena, for the introduction, and thank you and Colleen for curating this meaningful talk series, and thank you also for the opportunity to moderate this exciting panel. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's conversation starts with a simple observation that some of the most interesting exhibition platforms operating right now don't quite fit the categories we usually rely on. Neither traditional institutions nor conventional biannuals, but something more provisional, adaptive, and embedded. Across Qatar, Uzbekistan, and Tunisia, we're seeing the emergence of cultural platforms that don't quite behave like traditional institutions or recurring exhibition cycles. Rubaiya Qatar, the Bukhara Biennial, and Jaou Tunis operate as commissioning platforms, as research processes, and as site-responsive experiments, often embedded in lived contexts rather than neutral exhibition spaces. What connects them is not a shared aesthetic, but a shared willingness to rethink how exhibitions are produced, who they're for, and how they relate to place, time, and public life. I would like to begin by grounding us in how each of these platforms actually work before we move into what that enables and what it demands or entails. We're fortunate to have the leaders of each of these platforms with us this afternoon, and I will introduce them briefly. Sheikha Alanood Thani is the director of Rubaiya Qatar, a commissioning platform based in Doha that supports artists through long-term research, production, and site-responsive projects. Rubaiya has developed a distinctive approach that prioritizes process over spectacle, embedding artistic practice within lived contexts and emphasizing sustained engagement rather than episodic exhibition making. For those of you that were at this panel yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear Her Excellency Sheikha Mayasa say a few words about Rubaiya during her conversation with Maya Hoffman, and we look forward to hearing more about it in this panel from you, Alanood. Gayane Umerova is the head of the Department of Creative Economy and Tourism of the administration of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan. She's chairperson of the Uzbekistan Art and Cultural Development Foundation and chairperson of the 25th session of the UNESCO General Assembly. She is the founder and commissioner of the Bukhara Biennial, an ambitious research-driven platform that engages deeply with history, place, and contemporary artistic practice while operating at an international scale. Lina Lazaar is the founder of Jaou Tunis, vice president of the Kamel Lazaar Foundation, co-director of the Biennial of Moving Images, and founder of Ibraaz, a London-based art center aimed at promoting global majority voices. Through Jaou, she has developed an evolving platform that resists fixed formats and periodicity, foregrounding artistic research, collective inquiry, and alternative modes of public encounter in Tunisia and beyond. Previously, she served as contemporary art specialist at Sotheby's in London, where she helped establish the international market for contemporary Arab and Iranian art, and has curated major pavilions for the Venice Biennale. Lina sits on several institutional boards as well. Each of these speakers, and maybe before I continue, if you can please help me welcome our esteemed panelists. Thank you. Each of these speakers is building platforms that challenge how exhibitions are commissioned, produced, and encountered. So to begin, I'd like to ground us in how each of your platforms actually work. What strikes me, and I think I mentioned that earlier, is that they don't follow a fixed or standardized exhibition model. They seem more adaptive, shaped by site, by duration, by collaboration, and by the specific conditions of place. So could each of you please briefly describe the core operating logic of your platform, how projects are initiated and commissioned, and how those structural choices shape what ultimately becomes visible to the public. And then maybe reflecting on that, what do those choices make possible, and what is perhaps challenging as well? I know I packaged 5 questions in there, but you'll make it work. Alanood, would you like to begin?
I hope, yep, this works. So to answer your question about how what really drives us into, or what makes us want to, how these projects are initiated, it's really through connections. So it's about who we know and what we know, and kind of building off that. So it's about also what has come before us. So Rubaiya, there was an ecosystem that was here before, and we're building off that. We're building off the years of culture, the connections that we've built from there, the projects that we've imagined and kind of reimagined, and then from that we're putting it into the quadrennial. So it's really about understanding our context and what has driven us and what has gotten us to this place, and then moving forward. I think we are lucky. We are forced to reshape because we are new. So there was not a legacy or an institutional legacy that we had to propel forward. We were able to kind of look at where we are today as people, and then, like, right now in the 21st century, and kind of imagine it differently. And as the first quadrennial and born in the digital age, I think that's why we are natively different. It's just because of our time and who we are.
Yeah. Thank you. Gayane?
First of all, I would like to thank our gracious host, for creating this very important platform. It's really inspiring to see how one of the greatest platforms from around the world grounded in Qatar, also in our region. I have to say that Bukhara Biennial was all about grounding contemporary art in people, places, and living traditions. Because there is 2 elements to Bukhara Biennial. First of all, it was always logical to me that we have to do it in Bukhara, because Bukhara, it's a very special, unique place. It's a historical landscape that dates back to centuries. But at the same time, it has a very unique and special history. Of course, in the country, but in the life of the people. It used to be a very Islamic city, all about education, religion. And from 20th century, we became a secular country. And majority of Islamic architecture was not in use anymore, like mosque, madrasa, and even caravanserai. So it was logical to me that we need to energize these places. And in order to energize these places and bring in life to these places, there is no better solutions than bringing art and people to these places. So it was one of the elements to bring interest back to these places, but also to pairing together the internationally renowned artists and pairing them with local craftsmanship. And that was really beneficial, because at a certain amount of years we wanted to elevate the local artisans and to bring them to the stage as designers. And I think Bukhara Biennial was really beneficial in this matter.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. So perhaps before talking about kind of the operational side of Jaou, I'll tell you a little bit about what Jaou is. Jaou in Arabic means temperature, it means weather. But in Tunisian, colloquial Arabic, it also means something joyful that is shared. And for us, I think Jaou really kind of almost imposed itself on us. It wasn't a platform that was born out of some kind of institutional blueprint of like a particular model that needed to exist with a very kind of smooth and clear pathway, institutional pathway. It was very much born kind of the day after the Arab Spring, at a kind of a unique moment in time in the history of Tunisia, where creative expression was able to occupy public spaces and be, kind of free and open for the very first time in many, many years. So in that sense, I think that Jaou was very much responsive to a unique moment in time, which, to be honest, didn't necessarily follow a biennial format in the beginning. We didn't know that we would be a biennial. We started off, annually, and then we realized that we needed to catch our breath, and then kind of slowly found a cadence to things. And now it feels that, every 2 years is something that kind of is more sustainable for us as a team. In terms of operational structure, what I will say is that we've tried to remain, as you say, a little bit more agile. So we've, trying to kind of follow a little bit of a hub and spoke model, whereby we have a core team that's super dexterous, very kind of multidisciplinary, that can stretch across kind of programmatic content from films to performances to visual arts, but then of course with managerial capabilities. But that core team is able to kind of operate all year round on other foundation initiatives, such as our residency program in Tila Lutik in the kind of northern tip of Africa and Tunisia, but also a community art center in Lazaar in Tunis, and more recently, as you mentioned, the newly opened cultural center in London. And so that means that this core team is then kind of beefed up around Jaou with kind of much more specialized experiences and kind of skill sets, depending on what that edition entails and the thematics and what we're really looking to put together and platform. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe this is a good sort of segue. I was to talk a little bit about the sort of ecologies of production and the scaffolding that is required to carry out these platforms. What kinds of production ecologies do your platforms rely on? Logistical, financial, urban, human? Who are the actors that make your work possible? Architects, translators, craftspeople, municipal actors, and et cetera. And how do these ecosystems sort of shape the work itself? Is there something more to be said on that?
Maybe I'll just follow briefly on that. I think, it's all of the above, really. It takes a village, and particularly in a place like Tunisia, where, infrastructure is very scarce, and resources are equally scarce. And so I think that it very much, Jaou is about mobilizing an entire ecosystem and of different kind of members of the civil society that come together to make it happen. So in that sense, translators and curators and craftsmen and women, and really all of the above. And Jaou is very much, I think every edition is a product of all sorts of alliances and partnerships that happen to feed in those specific editions. But maybe to give you a more concrete case, this year we're going to have our 8th edition in Tunis later, end of October, and I'd love for as many of you as possible to come and visit us. But this year, for example, we realized, or actually a few years ago, we realized that the Tunisian ecosystem was really lacking sustained effort towards supporting moving images. And the technical kind of requirement, but also the capabilities to put together and install complex moving image installations. And so, one of these capability or kind of scaffolding infrastructure that we're trying to put in place this year is through a partnership with as you said earlier, with the Biennial of Moving Images in Switzerland, which is probably one of the oldest and most exciting biennial of moving images, called BEAM. And with them, what we're trying to do is put together a technical curriculum to form technicians, more or less 30 technicians who will come in and be put through a very specific training course that would allow them to not only retain the skills, but also, work in real time and ensure that they become, part and parcel of the installation process of this edition itself. So there's this, I think Jaou is as much about kind of presentation of the art and just making the works as accessible as it is about, transfer of knowledge and capability building.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, Gayane.
Yeah, just adding to what I have already said, I think when it comes to ecology, all of the objects was commissioned in Uzbekistan, and for us it was crucially important that all of the commissions are from Uzbekistan, using the local talents, the local materials, and some of the works was redone afterwards. They was made for the next purpose, like the work that we did with Anthony Gormley. It was a bricks made with local artisans, with local clay, and afterwards, throughout this year, it will be used for the local school of craft, which we're making reuse of it. And other works that we also did with the local artisans was we was making sure that we really adding to the creative economy in the country. So for us, one of the crucial points was trying also to speak to the local audience, to teach them, and also because in Bukhara is basically the city of craft. It's known in Uzbekistan as city of craft. It was very important to promote this among the younger generation of the Uzbeks, not just in Bukharian, but throughout the country, so they can come, learn, experience it, and hopefully they will be the next champions for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
For Rubaiya Qatar, we're really commission heavy, and most of our artists are not based here, but we do have a desire to have them as much as possible be produced here. Our kind of ethos is to make sure that some of these things that are not possible, to make them possible, and I think that kind of goes into Qatar's desire, and it's being a place of making things that are impossible happen. However, we also want to ensure, the same way as Bukhara does, is that there's something coming back to the community, where actually there is as much transfer as knowledge as possible. We're not losing opportunities in which students or even anyone who's interested can kind of learn and get into it, and there is a transfer of skill or what you're not. So, for example, our public art, one of our public artworks, that we were just talking about a few days ago, me and Sheikha, and one of the artists wanted to, do a mural, and we don't have necessarily the technicians there, but she does know someone, so she's thinking of bringing someone, and then there's that transfer of knowledge to local craftsmanship, so that they can continue, and we can continue to create these and not be reliant, and also there is that shared. We're also teaching them with other things, so there is that shared knowledge.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And maybe from transfer of knowledge to now talking a little bit about the public, the audience, I was going to say, but maybe it's more accurate to say the public. And each of you sort of work in context where the public is not abstract. It's specific, it's situated, and it's often shaped by social, political, or urban circumstances, if you want, and that raises the question not just about access, but also about sort of responsibility, and how do your platforms imagine your publics? Are these exhibitions meant to be encountered incidentally? Are they sought out deliberately or lived with over time? And how does that shape curatorial responsibility or direction?
Well, I love that you used the word imagined, because for us it is still imagined. We still don't, we're going to be inaugurating our first edition in November. But how we imagine it is that we're actually directly involved with the city and the people and the country, actually. And it's not just, in an exhibition space. We have public art, we have programmings and partnerships across the country in different institutions. And it's interdisciplinary partnerships to ensure that we are actually involved and actually part of the community and not doing something in silo of the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, when it comes to Bukhara Biennial, it's free admission. So basically, we was making sure that the local audience are all included. And because it's a living city, it's a living heritage city, it was always free to public. Although some of the spaces was abandoned, we made sure that the local audience respond to it. And because it's basically a walking distance, you are walking through this path of this creative district, which we created now. And part of the assignment to our creative director, Diana Campbell, and also our architectural director Wael Alavar, who was putting it in their agenda, so making sure that the people, the local people, and they're inclusive, they're included, and they feel that they can engage, so they can walk throughout the day, basically, this territories. They don't have to pay for anything and just feel included and just feel that they can come back. We even commissioned some of the artists to do playgrounds, because in Uzbekistan we have a vast amount of kids, and just to make sure that the kids are engaged and the parents are coming back, the grandparents are coming back. So for us, the local audience was as important as the international audience coming with, of course, their own experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think for us, maybe it's just slightly different in that the Jaou Biennial isn't staged in an existing kind of cultural framework or purpose-built building or cultural institutions per se. So every year, the entire kind of city of Tunis becomes like a blank canvas where we can start from. And because Tunisia, as I said earlier, doesn't have kind of necessarily those cultural infrastructure in place, but what it has is 3,000 years of cultural history and multiple layers of civilizational exchange, which means that every year we start up with the possibility of investing very different and kind of unique, both monumental and mundane spaces that could vary from being at the footstep of a Roman amphitheater, a hammam, a Turkish bath, a church, a synagogue, a labor union brutalist building. I mean, the kind of the breadth is so broad. That means that we're investing spaces that exist in highly dense social ecosystems. So I think this idea of audience is a little bit different with us. Mm-hmm. I think we're almost kind of transferring that equation in that we become the guests of these social ecosystems. And so for us, it's less about how does Jaou land in there and how do we kind of bring audiences to us, and more about how do you kind of how do you create those moments where there's like this kind of teeny tiny glitch that can, allow someone who's getting on with their daily life to really pay attention. And that, of course, happens. Yeah. I think most of our constituency experiences it less intentionally. I think it happens kind of almost coincidentally. But of course, we also have people, a lot of our friends and collaborators and international guests who come really kind of intentionally to experience it. But I think it's, again, a mix of all those audiences.
Yeah, I think it, I want to connect now a little bit to the question of sort of regional context and at the same time global stakes. And although Rubaiya, Bukhara, and Jaou are often discussed in relation to their regional contexts, they're clearly part of a broader international conversation. And I'd like to approach that without flattening the difference among them. But to what extent are each of your platforms responding to specific local conditions? And I think you were just describing that a little bit. And to what extent are they proposing models that might resonate or challenge dominant exhibition paradigms elsewhere? And I had a sub-question, which I'll say up front, which is, to what extent are you compelled to represent a place or region, and how do you resist doing that without being reductive, I guess?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. In terms of, we're born out of the urgency of the moment. So by definition, I think we are extremely responsive to the moment, to the present moment. And every year, or every edition rather, is almost, kind of starting from scratch all over again, because you really have to redefine the rules of engagement, the sites you're going to be, quote unquote, occupying, and the works that are going to be staged. So I think there's things are never settled, and of course, because we're born out of that specific political moment, which was the Arab Spring, and because of the volatility that has carried on ever since, we're constantly in this kind of iterative dialogue with the local conditions, whether they're political, social, historical, or now economical. So that's very kind of very much there. But in terms of the more global conversation, I don't think that happens intentionally at the organizational level. I would say that we tend to be extremely attracted, inspired, and moved by artists who are acutely aware of how fragmented the world is today and how, things are shifting and crises are multiplying and accelerating. And I think that the artists that we tend to be attracted to and want to work with are, want to kind of plug into this higher frequency and to be a part of, or rising up to some of the more kind of urgent questions that are presented to us that we have to try and at least sit uncomfortably with, right? And so I think as part of that, what happens is that, the artists take us on a journey that is somehow kind of broader than ourselves and somehow tie into a, something that we're quite committed to, which is the sense of being a part of a larger purpose, no?
Yeah, when we were speaking a few days ago, I remember you talking about the Mediterranean as an important factor for some artists. And for some others, maybe Tunisia.
Of course, look, it also helps that Tunisia is just a gorgeous country that's proudly African, proudly Arab, proudly Muslim, and also equally proudly Mediterranean. And that sense of kind of plurality, I find, has been a super fertile ground for artists. People, artists are really hugely inspired being there. And, it's not because of its... I think it's a lot to do with its historical resources, but it's also the sense that it's a gentle enough place for artists to feel safe to, deal with some of these urgent questions. So I think there's also obviously a lot to do with what we're blessed with over there.
Thank you. Gayane?
I think for Uzbekistan, it was an advantage that Bukhara and Uzbekistan as a whole maybe is not so much recognized and known country overseas. And I think this was one of the advantages for us. A lot of artists was just interested to be there, just to work there, to spend some time, maybe to get to learn about the new production places when they can commission their artworks. And I think being rooted on the Silk Road, it was also a huge advantage for us because for many artists from different regions, it was also about reviving these cultural trails. And, we have a lot of connections with Europe, with the Muslim world, with Southeast Asia. And again, it's all about the reviving what has been done in past. And I think Bukhara Biennial is very much rooted, past and present. It's very much grounding in this two elements. And I think for us it was clear from the beginning that we don't want to make any political statement in our platform. It was purely about art. It was purely about being multidisciplinary. We try to engage as a food as an element as well, because this is how we also connect to each other. We often go to Saudi and we eat Bukhari, but this is actually Uzbek plov, which was brought there with a pilgrimage. And this is kind of another layer of connection. And through food, we can really understand that we are one of the rice culture countries as well. So there is not only about the neighboring countries or the regional countries, but it also goes beyond. So I think just being cautious of all of these elements really made us quite unique.
Yeah. What about Rubaiya?
For Rubaiya, it's definitely, we kind of think of ourselves as a global platform that is definitely based in Qatar and centers itself here. And we recognize our past in terms of Qatar also being, a place in which there was a lot of trade and stopover. And if you haven't visited our archaeological sites, you should definitely go and you will learn much more about it. And for millennia, people have come here and passed by. And that's not always a narrative that has been spun, let's say, in the last few hundred years. And currently, and for the last half a century, the population here is majority expats. And that kind of global representation that's always here, and it's semi-permanent, has shaped what Rubaiya is. And kind of led us to also look beyond. So we don't have maybe as much representation of Qatari artists. We're not a Qatari exhibition. It's a very much a global thing, but you can definitely find Qatar in every work, or at least some essence of it, or at least we're trying to show some story of it. For our exhibition in Unruly Waters, for example, where I can see three of the curators here, Ruba, Mark, and Mustafa. They're artists who they're commissioning. Most of them fall in the Indian Ocean, and kind of the proportions of commissions also kind of very loosely mirror Qatar's population. So there's definitely a global outlook for us.
There's a sort of increasing tendency to frame experimental exhibition models like the ones that we're talking about here through the language of the so-called global south or global majority, if you want, often as sites of innovation born of necessity, perhaps. Do you find that the idea that the most inventive exhibition models are emerging in the global south? And do you find that productive or limiting? And what does that framing reveal, and what it might obscure about power, resources, and authorship in sort of contemporary art? Any thoughts on that?
I do think the framing of it is very limiting, but I also think it kind of goes into this. I think there's something underneath it in which the global south is not expected to do this, right? The global south is not meant to be making and leading. It's the West, and the idea of anything we do is somewhat infantilized in a way. It's like a child being successful. It's like unexpected. So I don't think I take it very well. And I think the global south is a very broad term that I don't even understand. It just doesn't work. So that's my opinion on that.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree less. I think it's a very broad, But when it comes to Bukhara Biennial, I think it was very important for us to have this joint authorship because it's artist and artisan, So it made sure, it's kind of a linear. I don't have anything to add to this, to be honest.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think, I can see the appeal of trying to say that, the Global South is more innovative and nimble and flexible, but the truth is, it's always been the case. It's not been more or less. It's just that now there seems to be a spotlight on it, and so, as you say, I think it's more about allowing for some of it to be a bit more visible. In terms of your point on global majority, I mean, I don't really like the word global south as a whole. I think that it would be really unfortunate and tremendously limited to consider creative expression from the perspective of maps and kind of borders. Whereas I think with the denomination of global majority, there's something quite exciting in that A, it's factually more correct. It is a global majority, a majority world. And B, what's a little bit more interesting about it is that it kind of opens up the possibility of building on what's shared, what we have in common at a time where I think we need it most. And that, could be, shared histories and shared struggles and shared ecologies. And so much of it can actually, at least I think, open up a place for alliances and relationships and kinships and solidarity that I think are much more kind of generative than these kind of new hierarchies of South versus North, So in that sense, maybe, but then what is the global majority? I often joke with my team in London, we're thinking that maybe Greenland is probably more a part of the global majority than Micronesia today. I mean, it's an aspirational point and more of a position of solidarity than it is anything else.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And maybe I'll come to sort of our last question, but looking ahead, what feels most urgent to protect in the platforms that you're building, and what feels most in need of rethinking, if you want? Yeah, go ahead, Sheikh Alanood. Yeah.
The thing that I think we should really protect is our relationships with artists. I think, and that's also what is the most difficult. The bureaucracy, the systems that enable us to make these to make it possible also kind of hinders us. But I think it's that relationship with artists and ensuring that they're getting the support they need. And not actually, maybe I shouldn't just say artists, creatives or thinkers also, because they are also our partners and our agents of change and connection. So it's that connection that I think is most in need of protection.
Well, in our case, it's architecture and heritage, because it's basically all of the buildings are historical, and it's dated from 7th century to the 14th, majority of the mosque and madrasa. So in our case, we have to be very careful using these spaces for the exhibitions, but of course, bearing in mind these historical places. So we have a huge kind of other agenda to address it, and this is why every 2 years, of course, we have a biennial, but then every other year, when there is not a biennial, we're making sure we're reviving the new spaces within this whole district. And for us, it's a huge threat also with ecology now, and with the global warming, because in Uzbekistan, all of these moments can really damage the architecture. So we're making sure we work closely with UNESCO and with all the partners around us to making sure that we are protecting this building while we're making a use of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, can you please just repeat the question? So what is it worth?
Yeah, the question was around looking ahead, what feels most urgent to protect in the platforms you're building, whether it's the project itself, or maybe just in general, the kind of flexibility that we talked about, and what feels most in need of rethinking. And you had talked a little bit about Ibraaz as well as a kind, in addition to Jaou, so maybe that's worth talking about as well.
What's most needed, at least for us, what I think we need most protecting is this. This sense of resilience and this ability to start from scratch at every edition. I think having the stamina to carry on this and dealing with kind of all the challenges and complexities at hand. But I think more generally, like maybe being hopeful. I think that's really important today, and at least finding ways of serving artists to help us imagine different possible futures. I think that sense of hope is something we should absolutely nurture. In terms of the second part of the question.
I mentioned Ibraaz. I thought that would be maybe another good connection as a kind of an extension.
I mean, Ibraaz is kind of the newest initiative of our organization. It's just 4 months old now. It's a newly opened cultural center in London, and it is giving us a huge amount of hope at a time where we find that we've needed it most. And it's a platform that's been as I said, super young, but is really squarely committed to connecting diasporic voices in London and elsewhere with this majority world that we were referring to earlier. It's a new chapter. It's extremely exciting. I really invite all of you to come and visit us in London. It's going to take a village to build, and so we will. And one more thing that we need protecting is actually alliances and collaborations. I think that's really essential. At least for us, that's really the most important part of our work, is being able to do this collectively and working with like-minded institutions that that want to embark with us on this journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Gayane. Thank you, Sheikha Alanood, for sharing your thinking and experiences with us so generously. Thank you to our audience for staying with a conversation that sort of resists easy conclusions, and I hope this discussion leaves us not with a single sort of model to replicate, but with sharper questions about how exhibitions might continue to evolve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheikha Alanood. Thank you, Gayane. Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Amir. Thank you for creating new spaces for artists to be inspired and to inspire all of us in the process. And thank you all for being here today. I invite you to come back tomorrow. We'll be back at 1:30 with a new panel looking at public art with three fantastic creatives, the architect Sumaya Vali, and artist Ryan Tabet and Shehzad Dawood. So looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow.